Hi everyone. Welcome to the Tech Talks of FTech, the technology side of FARFETCH. Thank you for joining us on this talk to know more about performance. It's a pleasure to be with you today virtually. I'm Pedro, the communication responsible for the FTech, and I'll be with you during this talk as the host. We are going to use the next hour with Manuel Garcia talking about performance. Just to introduce Manuel a little bit, Manuel has more than 15 years of experience in software development. He worked in several areas, but has specialized in manufacturing and semiconductor industries, where he worked in multiple projects and technologies. In one way or another, Manuel was always very close to web development, working both on the back end and front end. Following that path, Manuel joined FARFETCH 4 years ago to work on farfetch.com, together with several teams to improve our processes and take farfetch.com to the next level. He's a performance geek and has been developing a performance mindset since he joined. But the best person to speak about that is Manuel. Before I hand over to him, I just wanted to tell you that if you have any questions about the presentation or some doubts about this, you could write in the Q&A chat. I will collect all of them and we try to answer as much as we can in the end of today's session. Once again, thank you for joining us. And now I hand over to Manuel. Welcome, Manuel, and good luck for your presentation.
Thank you, Pedro. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. And before I start, I want to let you know that we prepared a poll for everyone that's on the call. This is just a simple question about the subject that we are going to discuss today, a question with a few options. So to make everything more interesting, please do participate. I'm gonna answer that question once I reach slide 11. So please do try to participate. Today, I have another opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is performance. And in this case, how to build a performance culture. So if you are just starting with performance and you want to understand how to install a performance mindset at your company, hopefully, I'm going to be able to give you enough insight in how to approach it. And also, or if you already have performance practices and you want to understand or have a different perspective or angle on performance, this will also be beneficial to you. Or if you simply are a performance enthusiast and just want to know a bit more about performance, this will all be relevant to you. I'm going to focus a lot on web performance. And I'm also going to use e-commerce as the main business around performance. I'm going to give examples on farfetch.com. Farfetch.com is our main website. Farfetch is an e-commerce platform for the luxury fashion. And so by using farfetch.com, I'm going to be able to give you real-world examples that you can relate to. In terms of agenda, I'm going to go through this path, which I call performance culture journey. Think of this as a set of stages. These are a set of steps that I recommend following into reaching that end goal of having a performance culture. And this is an order that I find it's most effective, but depending on your current state around performance, you can seeing yourself working at different stages at the same time, or you can even swap stages around if it makes sense to you. But this is, like I said, a possible approach and the one that I think it's most effective in implementing on a big company. At the end, we also have time for some questions and answers. So let's start with this performance culture journey. And with that, let's start with our first stage. And this is like lesson number 1. It's like our homework. If you are interested in installing or creating a culture around a certain subject, it makes sense to know as much as possible about it. Performance isn't any different from any other subject matter. So in this case, and especially because we are relating performance with an e-commerce business, so having a business online, it's important for us to realize that we have users, right? And we need customers to grow our business. And so we need to understand what sort of importance has speed and performance for our users. And if we ask them directly, and this is a case study from Google a few years ago, if we ask our users, we can see that for the majority of the users, the speed it takes to load a page is more important than other things like how attractive the site looks or how easy it is to find what I'm looking for. And if you think about it, it's not really a surprise, right? Because in order for us to unlock that amazing user experience that we want to deliver, it's important for us to be fast into delivering that first content and to bootstrap the whole site in order for us to grow that experience. So it's not surprising that the user values the non-functional aspect of our products above anything else. And if we think about performance, this is really related with perception, with how we perceive things and how we perceive time, right? But we all know that time can be a strange thing, because let's look at an example. If I have a listing page that takes 5 seconds to load, that can look very fast to me, but it can also be at the same time very slow and painful to someone else. And even for the same person, those same 5 seconds can both be slow and fast. And this is why it is subjective. It's a subjective matter, and with performance, it's the same thing. The real performance is not what our numbers tells us. It's how the user feels and perceives things, what we typically call perceived performance. But we most of us as engineers, we need to work with objectivity, right? We build products, we need measurements. So all of that needs to be very objective. So we work on objective time, and that's why we create metrics and measurements in order for us to be guided by them. And when we are trying to improve performance, we are trying to make an impact on objective time with the expectation that it will also translate to subjective time and, as a consequence, improve the way that the users perceive the products that we are putting out there. And so with that, our perception will always be rooted with subjectivity. And so there we can see that there are external factors that really can influence the way we perceive things and how we perceive time. The first one, effective use. This one has to do with how we bootstrap and how we organize the architecture of our application. This is pretty common in retail, in which, for instance, if we consider a listing page, and with that listing page, our objective is to load a set of products, and if we count that page, fully loading the page, it will take a lot of time because we are talking about loading a lot of information. But if we prioritize the most important content first, typically what we call that is above the fold, right? What the user sees. The user can only engage with what he sees. The content that's below the fold is not meaningful for the user because he cannot engage with it right away. And so if we are smart in having good strategies to prioritize that first content first, the user will feel that the site is ready to use. And so this is deliberate and very specific approach that you can use, and that will influence the way that the user perceives what we are building. The age of the user is also important, because if you are older, you'll feel that you are more tolerant to slower page loads, as if you were younger, between 18 and 24 years old, more or less, you'll be a lot less tolerant to slow page loads. And that's also not a surprise, because it's related with our society, with our generations, with the digital age. So younger people are already used to having devices, access to information at a younger age. So they are used to having that information fast. And if they have to wait a lot of time in order to have that information, they will move at a fast pace someplace else to find that information. So on e-commerce, this can be a difference between making a sale or losing the customer to competition. Our state of mind is also very important, because if we are calm, we'll be more willing to wait that extra amount of time than if we are nervous and anxious, and with that we'll be a lot less tolerant. And of course, if you are moving, if you are on the street, you'll find yourself wanting to have that information faster than you would be if you are just sitting down. So all of these external factors are important, because even if we consider a fast page load, it can be still slow to someone that's moving around and that's anxious. And so that will always be subjective. But what we do believe is that faster page loads means happier users. That's what they tell us, right? That's what we ask, and that's what they answer. And with happier users, we will have higher conversions, and with higher conversions, we will have more revenue. So we want to scale our business. And so now I have reached slide 10, which means that on slide 11, I will get to provide you the answer for the poll. And I'm checking the results and see that I think that most of the people did not get the answer correct, because and the question is really what 100 milliseconds means for a business like Amazon, and in the number that I have access to, and I have been following these numbers for some years now, and the most recent numbers that I have access to say that or show that 100 milliseconds delay on page load time for Amazon means a 1% drop in revenue. And this, at the scale of Amazon, means almost $4 billion a year. So the right question was the third one, above $3 billion a year. And as you can see, this is massive, right? We are talking about 100 milliseconds. We're not even talking about half a second. So this is really huge. And like I was saying, I've been following these numbers for some years now, and they were a lot lower in the past. And which means that as your business grows, as it scales, also performance will increase its importance, and sometimes at an exponential rate. We cannot forget about SEO as well, because since we are talking about e-commerce, it's important to acquire more users, and we cannot lose sight of SEO. And for SEO also values fast page load. So it's important for you to keep that at the heart of everything, because that will also have a negative consequence. If you lose sight of performance, it will have a negative impact on SEO. So if we look at the SEO perspective, we'll also see that faster page loads will mean better SEO. With better SEO, we will have better rankings. With better rankings, we will have a higher probability of acquiring more users. That's what we want. We want more users to grow our business. And with more users, we'll have higher conversions, which will mean more revenue. So these are like two different streams that end up at the same result: more business, a bigger business, all bound to the same aspect, which is performance. So performance does matter a lot. And if you're running a serious business online, you just cannot hide from it. Stage 2 is measuring, right? We need to measure in order for us to understand a little bit more where we stand in terms of performance. And here I'm going to follow a safe path and recommend using Core Web Vitals. Core Web Vitals is a concept brought by Google, which is just a set of metrics. These metrics already exist before. We are talking about largest contentful paint. Largest contentful paint is related with visual perception. So it accounts the largest content that is painted on the user screen. So if we are looking at the product details page, for instance, we are really talking about the image of the product. So the most important content on that viewport. And we are talking about putting that content in the user's device as fast as possible. That will contribute to a better largest contentful paint. Trying to shoot below 2.5 seconds will classify as a good largest contentful paint, so that's where you want to move towards. First input delay. This is not related with visual perception, but it's more on the interactivity. So basically what the browser's main thread is doing, and if it's fast enough to give feedback once the user first interacts with the page. If it taps a button, we want to measure the delay on that feedback. And you want to shoot to below 100 milliseconds because at that level, the feedback will feel instant to the user. And that's where you want to be as well. Cumulative layout shift. This is not really a performance metric. It's more towards visual stability, and it accounts layout shifts. So basically, for the users, and we are all users, that's the beauty of it. We don't want to see content moving around. If there's a button that we want to click, we don't want to feel that it's moving around. And so this is annoying, and this frustrates the user and frustrates the whole user experience. So you want to keep it as consistent and stable as possible. So these three metrics are very interesting metrics and different perspectives on performance that I want to recommend. And connecting again this with SEO. And for Google, these three metrics are three important signals that are very valuable for SEO. So even if you wouldn't believe or you were having doubts of the significance of such metrics, you will have to be close to them anyway because they are important signals for SEO. Of course, you can also use other metrics. At farfetch.com, we use these metrics as well. Time to first byte has been around for several years. It still works and is still valuable. It accounts when we start the request on a page, the latency until it reaches our servers, all the internal latency that goes around into processing that request until we deliver that first byte of data. It's what we typically call the backend time. The first contentful paint, it tracks the first text or image that is painted on the screen. This is what I typically call first impression. So it's the first indication to the user that something is happening. And the speed index is going forward with that intention. It's completing the layout in order to give confidence to the user that the site is ready to use. So it accounts how complete the viewport looks. And time to interactive, it has to do with interactivity and when the site is fully interactive. So when the main thread is idle enough for us to be confident that it will be fast to process any sort of interaction with the page. Page size is not time related, but it's also interesting in a way for you to control the size of your site. So it accounts all the assets that we are downloading for the page, JavaScript, CSS fonts, all static assets that are important. And we should not forget that all the metrics that I've been talking about, they are generic. They will work on an e-commerce site as well as any other site. And if you are running a business, there is no reason why we cannot design our own metrics. And so I'm a big fan of instrumentation and creating custom metrics. Here is just an example. It is called time to add to bag, and it's a custom metric specifically designed for a product details page. It needs three conditions in order for us to meet our time to add to bag. So we need the hero image. This is the largest content on the viewport. So this is really what the largest contentful paint tries to measure. But we here are mixing some additional conditions into play, like the product data or metadata that is bound to the product, like the designer and the price. It's important to have the price to get a connection between the price and the product image. And we want to have the add to bag button alive. And alive, I mean all the life cycles hooks that need to be executed in order to guarantee that we can click the button and add the product to the bag. They all have to be met as well. And basically, this metric tries to express the objective of having this page. We want to maximize the clicks on that button. We want to be fast and be able to deliver that button so that the user can click it as fast as possible. And so I believe that you can be creative in creating rules that better express what ticks your business. So that's really an expression that we have control of, and it can be really, really powerful. Stage 3 is preventing regressions. When I was trying to create this content, I was in doubt if I was going to recommend prevent regressions at stage 3. But as I thought more and more about it, I was confident that that would be the best possible advice. Because even if you don't know where you stand in terms of performance, it's important for you to create a threshold. And a threshold is really what we are talking about, is performance budgets. It's a very well-known concept on the performance community, but we are just talking about a threshold that we don't want to cross. We want to live under a budget, really. That's what we want. We do this in a lot of other areas. So for performance, it's really the same. We want to keep a standard. And with that, I think that's valuable, because even if you don't know what you need to improve, the fact that you have a budget will tell you that it will help you understand if you are getting slower and faster. There are numerous examples out there that companies that try to improve, and a few months later they end up in the same result. And so even if you can't improve right away, it's important for you to have that threshold and protect it. And with this, it also means that you have to become better at understanding where performance bottlenecks can come from. That can be challenging. I talk with personal experience on that, and because there can be a lot of different things. Probably you are running a microservice architecture. Bottlenecks can come from within your infrastructure. If you have a site, e-commerce site, chances are that you connect to different domains. They can also have issues and bring issues, and you can have degradations in a lot of places. So you need to work your way, and this is part of the culture, in creating knowledge around where performance bottlenecks can come from. And you have to have good tools. You have to have rich data in order to give you insight in where these degradations can come from. And that will give you a framework for you to work on and protect and better protect that threshold. The performance budget is really strategic in a way, because it helps create a spirit of self-enthusiasm towards performance. And on farfetch.com, we have different teams working on different pages, which means that will give that team that ownership. So they all try to live by that standard. They all try to protect it. It's like their stamp. It's like the stamp of quality that they want to look after. So it's very deliberate and a good advice that you should follow. And here are just a few examples of budgets. They can be time related. I feel that time related budgets become a lot easier to explain to people because everyone understands time. So that facilitates. In this aspect, we are seeing on the right, time to interactive budget. We are basically saying that we want to be interactive under 5 seconds on a slow 3G network on a medium end device, which can be very, very challenging, especially if you are talking about an e-commerce site that has a lot of content that comes from first party and third party. But it is just an example of what a budget can be. You can also have quantity-based budgets, which are related with the size, and that we propose ourselves to have a critical bundle size that does not go over 170 KB of compressed data, where we try to squeeze in all of the critical content, like our frameworks, our first party code, everything that's vital to bootstrap the application and get that site ready to use. So these are just good examples that you can use. And there are various tools out there that you can use in order to get inspiration and in order for you to validate that these budgets are being followed. And you really want to maximize and try to have these performance budgets everywhere you can. And there are 3 places that I believe that are very important for you to not miss on this concept, which is local environment. This is where it all starts, right? Where we are developing our feature and we are trying to put our feature on a production environment. And so we do our builds, we do our code, we probably add a dependency, and with that dependency may come more code, and all of a sudden we have bigger bundles. So it's important to stay on top of that and keep an eye on how our code is growing. So it's very convenient to have that at an early stage like local development. You can also use Lighthouse because it's very convenient. You can spin an audit and try to understand if your development is introducing some sort of penalty, a strong penalty that you will be able to catch as soon as possible. The whole idea is that we can capture regressions as soon as possible before we ship code to production. That's really the beauty of it. CI/CD, it's the best place where you don't want to miss doing this kind of validations. You can use web page test, for instance. Web page test is my weapon of choice. I have been using it for several years. It's perhaps the best tool, best synthetic tool out there, free to use, which you can use to do, for instance, traffic shaping, that you can emulate specific network latencies in order for you to do your tests. And you can even connect real devices to it. So a good strategy here is like using a device that best represents your user base, and try to do this performance budget validations on the pipeline so that you can have these tests validated on a device that is meaningful for your business. So again, it's very deliberate to do it in that way. You can also use Lighthouse on CI/CD and on the live environment. Of course, you can use tools like SpeedCurve. This is just an example. The SpeedCurve is a great tool and embrace this concept of performance budgets early on. But you can have other tools, real user monitoring tools, synthetic tools, because this is the live environment, right? This is where the business operates. So this is where you need to understand if you are introducing regressions or not. So it's these three places are places that you can introduce and that can help you progress this culture of budgeting. Stage 4 is creating long-term objectives. So we have covered the foundations, really metrics and so on, and prevent regressions, and we need some vision, right? We need to create long-term objectives. And for that, even if you don't know what to improve or where you want to be at, I think that you can use performance as a business driver and have a business-oriented mindset, really. Because this is very deliberate, and it's basically trying to get an edge on things and be a step ahead of competition. So this is it makes sense for someone who's managing a whole business, that we can be faster than competition. And in this case, the recommendation that I feel can be very, very relevant, it's be at least 20% faster than your fastest competitor. And the 20% is not there by chance. So it's not a magic number. It's very deliberate as well, because this is connected with a concept from psychology. I'm a true believer that there are important lessons that we can take from psychology and human behavior that we can put at work in engineering, into building better products and have better strategies to have an edge on things. And so just noticeable difference, it's the amount that we are able to detect a change. So that means basically, on a very specific example, if I have a listing page, let's say a listing page from a competitor, and that listing page takes 5 seconds to load. And then I have my listing page, which is faster, but below 20%. If I ask the user what he thinks is the fastest page, he'll probably not be able to tell the difference. So it will not be able to capture any difference, although my page is faster. But the good part about this is that it also works the other way around. So if my page was 20% slower, user wouldn't be able to detect a change either. So that's why we have here at least 20%. Let's say we shoot for 30%. And now we ask the same question to our user. But in this case, my page is 30% faster. On this example, the response from our user will be different. So in this case, there's a high probability for the user to detect a change here. And that's where you want to be. You want to have that edge. And that this is a good pattern and a standard to measure against. And so that you can keep investing in being ahead of competition. You can also use other specific metrics to drive a vision. Largest contentful paint, as you may realize, is very connected with visual perception. If you are good at this point in putting that content there as fast as possible, this will always be good for keeping users on the site, and so they don't lose interest. And so proposing yourself to have 90% of your pages, this is just an example, of course, 90% of the pages below 2.5 seconds is challenging. And so you can work towards having step by step, trying to get at those numbers, month by month, trying to prove the good buckets, so be below 2.5 seconds and increase your presence on this bucket. Time to interactive. If you are running an e-commerce business with first party and third party code, chances are that you may have an issue with time to interactive. So proposing yourself to shave off 50% can also be very ambitious. But the whole thing about these visions is like you have a long-term goal, but you are able to break it down on short-term goals because you'll feel that this will be a lot more sustainable long-term. Stage 5, improving performance. Here, I'm going to squeeze some content here in order to recommend some things that can be beneficial in terms of improving performance, because we could be doing a complete talk or 2 talks just about the recommendations around improving performance. I'm going to focus on what I believe it's the typical bottleneck on modern applications. Yes, for sure, latency is a big issue, and it was in the past, but with modern applications, as we are shipping more and more JavaScript, JavaScript is the most expensive asset we have there on the browser side. What the numbers we have from this year, 2021, the medium size that sites are pulling in terms of JavaScript size is close to 0.5 megabyte compressed. So we are talking about the data that goes through the wire, which uncompressed means megabytes of JavaScript that we are parsing, compiling, and executing. All of this goes through a single thread. And so this means that JavaScript is very CPU bound. And even with the optimizations that we have on browsers, for instance, V8 with code caching that makes parsing and compiling a lot faster, the execution can really be painful, and it can be very CPU bound, which means that you have a high probability of creating long tasks. And long tasks are JavaScript execution that takes more than 50 milliseconds. If you are taking it longer than 50 milliseconds, it means that you are creating blocking time. And that basically means that the UI will be frozen and it will not be idle enough to do other things that may be important at critical times, like collecting user input or responding to some action on the UI. That will be frozen, and it will cause an issue on interactivity. So you need to break down these long tasks, and what I typically recommend is by doing a good house cleaning, because there are code that we ship that is not used, and you will be surprised with the amount of sites that are shipping code that it's not used. So if we want to spare the main thread, it doesn't make sense to send code that we don't use. So at least from the code that you have control of, you should do the best you can to prevent shipping code that will not benefit anything on the site. You can use code coverage on Chrome to inspect the code that's being used and not used, or use Webpack Bundle Analyzer, which gives you a bird's eye view on all the dependencies that you are pulling together in your bundles, and you'll be surprised with the things that you find. I have had these examples over the years of things that surprisingly get included in bundles where I would have no use case for. And so you need to be on top of that. And also there's a good strategy followed out there by a lot of sites. We do that at farfetch.com, which is serving modern code to modern browsers and legacy bundles to legacy browsers. So if you have legacy browsers, try to serve polyfills for browsers that do not recognize ECMAScript modules, for instance, and keep giving the most modern code to browsers that support ECMAScript modules. A typical approach and can be very beneficial as well. Off-main thread architecture is an architecture type that I'm very fan of, that you are able to offload computation to a web worker. A web worker is like a different thread that does not have access to the DOM. This is what I typically see people over the years that pushes people away, not having access to the DOM. But this can also not be as evident for e-commerce, as probably you don't have a lot of computation and calculation on the client side in order for you to get the benefit of offloading this to a web worker, because there's also context switching, which also may introduce a penalty, but may not be the most evident use case for e-commerce, but it can be very beneficial anyway to free the main thread. And how we work with web workers is through an event system where you send messages and receive messages. And you even have tools and libraries that can abstract that for you with more declarative APIs that you will completely abstract the way you communicate with web workers. So this, together with WebAssembly, that I'm not going to focus on this talk, can be really interesting scenarios for you to explore in order to reduce the stress that you can put on the main thread. Optimizing the critical handling path. This does not have to do exactly with CPU, but it can definitely help also as well. But it's trying to put performance at the heart of how we design products, right? It's like building a house. If we are building a house, we want to have a strong foundation. So if we put performance at an early stage where we are designing and we want to have really design how the product is bootstrapping, it's important for us to consider performance in order to do what we talked before as having an impact on the perceived performance. And so with the critical handling path, we just want to make sure that we have this path as short as possible. The critical handling path is all the steps that the browser executes in order to render a page. So the browser needs to create the DOM, the document object module, so parsing the HTML. It needs to build the CSS object module. It needs to run scripts on both the DOM and on the CSS object module. It then needs to combine both on the render tree. It needs to lay out elements and rasterize pixels. If you then execute more JavaScript that mutates the DOM or forces repaints and reflows, this will elongate that critical rendering path. And when you do that, this will have a negative impact on perceived performance because the site will look slower. And so that's why you need to contain all of this and have good strategies. Remember about those external factors that we talked about that can influence perception and the critical bundle size. So this is a good opportunity for you to define what is critical and have that guarantee that you are able to deliver this to the browser in order to unlock and have that site ready to use. And use good strategies like making lazy load your friend. Lazy loading non-critical JavaScript and CSS, and lazy loading images that are not on the viewport. So all of these are good strategies for you to optimize this critical handling path. Compression is also something that is not complex to implement, that can be very, very beneficial. You would want to shoot for maximum compression level for static assets, things like CSS and JavaScript. And if you are using Brotli, you can shoot for maximum compression level. Brotli has more compression levels than gzip, and you can shoot for maximum level. With that, you also can do this on your pipelines, trying to pre-compress the assets on a pipeline, or if you have a CDN that also allows this sort of feature, it can also take care of that heavy lifting for you. For HTML, if you're doing server-side rendering and generating HTML on the fly, for that case, I wouldn't recommend going maximum level. Here you'll have to have some sort of compromise on medium levels, using Brotli perhaps between 4 and 6, and try to have a good compromise between compression speed and compression ratio. Resource hints. Resource hints are tags or HTTP response headers that we can augment our responses in order to improve performance. And normally these are quick wins. So they would be very hard to implement, and they can be extremely beneficial. Here I'm going to focus on two of them, which is pre-connect and DNS prefetch. So if you are, and probably you are on e-commerce for sure, connecting to a lot of different domains, you can warm up those connections by using these resource hints. For instance, pre-connect will do a DNS lookup for that domain. It will create the TCP connection to that domain and do the SSL negotiation. And this can be done early on, even before you request some data to that domain. So doing this ahead of time can take time, precious time, when you really want to get data from that domain, as getting Google fonts, for instance. It's a very common pattern out there. The DNS prefetch it's the same, but it only does the DNS lookup part. So do invest on doing this, because typically these are very low effort. Optimizing images. If you are talking about e-commerce, we have to have images. Although 2021, it looks like video is taking the crown on the biggest size it takes from an e-commerce perspective. But with images, we really need to make sure that we are betting on next generation formats like AVIF or WebP, that we can follow a response images approach using like the picture element that we can bet on next generation, but have a fallback contingency plan for formats that are older, that the browser would guarantee support. And also we have to have different alternatives on images, that we can request the right size images for the right use case, and avoid doing scaling on the client that will involve more computation. And of course, trying to optimize images without losing quality, so that we are able to still have a good quality image, but reducing the payload, which can contribute to improving performance, and trying to lazy load off-screen images. And with this, even browsers support this natively. So in a way, you don't even need to send out JavaScript in order to have this lazy loading feature for images or iframes, for instance. And be adaptive. You want to understand which sort of condition you are connected to. So if you are connected to a high latency network, it probably is not a good idea to download an HD video, and in that situation you can use like a web worker, or a service worker that can tap or understand what type of network you are connected, and give this hint to the server to download the right content for that situation. So this is also a sign of resilience, and a way that you are trying to promote a good experience instead of forcing an experience that will never work. So this will benefit the user experience and performance overall. Stage 6 is showing business impact. So if you are able to reach this point, this will always be beneficial to any company, because you would be introducing a concept that everyone understands, which is money. Up until now, the only concept that everyone understood was time. And time, we saw that time can be subjective. So if you are able to include money, this will always be beneficial in driving a performance culture, because everyone understands that performance is important, right? but at what level? If you are able to put a price tag on it, that will facilitate in moving forward, because people understand, and this becomes a lot more objective in terms of impacts and trade-offs. So, and it also puts you in a higher position. So it really steps up your game. At FARFETCH, we build a convenient business calculator to help teams and product managers to drive performance initiatives. So we know every metric, the business impact it can have on pages. Our teams typically are divided or working on different pages, so they can be strategic, understand the metrics that they can have more impact of, and propose themselves on initiatives that can help performance. And with that, we have a common ground in terms of initiatives, because we are able to put a price on it and a value and a revenue that we can get, and that is playing with the same rules and prioritizing all the initiatives that we have in order to help the company as much as possible. And performance is one of those main drivers of revenue that we can explore. And stage 7 is connecting our business. And with this, what I'm trying to say is to install a mindset from the engineering point of view. If we look at this, let's call it this constellation, like this is a distributed system. All of these points are important for us to process, like our time to first, right? And so it does not make sense for a part of this constellation to be bound and have a performance mindset, and another part does not have that concern. So it has to go all the way through. It has to penetrate all the infrastructure and how we look at the service that we are providing and the level of service that we have on top of each of our dependencies. So we need basically to row in the same direction. And so we need to install a policy of budgets everywhere, so that we are better and less reactive and more proactive when we have regressions, and that we can be more deliberate in where we introduce performance improvements to have a higher business impact and improving the user experience. And of course, we basically just want to make performance a share of responsibility. Performance cannot be seen as an afterthought. And I come from those days where performance was dealt at the end of the project, right? As an optimization. And we cannot see performance as something that is dropped on an engineering team to fix. That's not the culture that we are trying to promote here. We want to see performance as a shared responsibility, and so we need collaboration. Collaboration unlocks the full potential of performance, and so that's why you need to align, and so that's why it was delivered in a way that you have proven the impact on performance, because it makes this step or this stage a lot more easier. And the culture obviously is made of people. We can talk about metrics and tools, but it's made of people. So you need to be global and talk and repeat yourself. It's part of the job. You need to communicate with a lot of people, show the benefits, show the trade-offs, try to improve, find other metrics, experiment with them, share them, and celebrate wins. This is connected with long-term goals. You need to celebrate wins and put those wins out there, because everyone, if we are part of a successful culture, this also attracts people. So it draws people also into this culture, because people want to be part of a winning culture, right? Successful culture. And so this also attracts and creates this system that's never ending, and we try to feed and give it more. And also the company will recognize this, and it will create more room for the culture to grow. And to wrap it at the end, we found that this path is a lot to take. It's complex. It has a lot of challenges, of course, but it's something that if you put your mind to it, it's something that you need to promote as much as possible, because you are helping the company to step up its game. And if you are able to reach a point where you are able to quantify investments being made to the code base, if they are worth it or not, taking account the performance penalty, this is already a sign that you are maturing and that the company is maturing, and that you are able to reach a point where the company sees performance as another lever that it can drive in order to get more value and grow the business. So there will be step backs, there will be frustration, but I typically think of that this is part of the game, is part of the job. If it was easy, it wouldn't be any fun, and it wouldn't be as rewarding as I believe it is. So my main advice is keep strong on this path, follow it, don't give up, keep pushing. Thank you. And this is all for me. We now have time for questions and answers.
Thank you so much, Manuel, for your presentation. So we still have 8 minutes for our questions, and we have now 3 questions already, 4, I think. Yeah, 4 questions. And the first question is from Nelson March. How we can create the first performance budget dashboard for an internal microservice? How we can define a baseline?
Good question. And I have seen a lot of examples in how to approach that. You can do this in isolation, like having a seasonal analysis of the latency of that service, because we are talking about internal services. We are talking about just latency. We don't have access to all of these metrics that I've been talking to that are more close to our users. But we can do this, have this analysis, but I typically recommend talking with other consumers, which we are trying to put a threshold or have an idea of the level of service. We should contact customers, because the way I see performance from my perspective may be different from the performance that the provider is providing. So it's always a good first step to meet and talk about it. I've seen and done this with good results.
Okay. Next question from Andre. From all the stages that you've shown, what do you think it's the easiest and hardest to accomplish?
Okay, that's a good one as well. I'm going to leave out the first stage because, like I said, it's homework. It has to be there anyway. I'll say that the easiest one would be stage 2, where we are talking about measurement, because there is a lot out there. And if you bet on Core Web Vitals, you will not be in a bad place. I'm not saying that the metrics subject is easy. It's not easy. And there is no such thing as a single metric to measure performance. That does not exist. It's a myth. But if you start with these metrics, you are in a good place. So I would say that's not hard. The hardest part is really the last one, right? Where you have done all of this and you need to connect everything. That will be challenging. It will take time. But I mean, you have to persevere in doing that and continue to on that path and show the benefit. But of course, because you have a big company, a lot of things are going on. That will be perhaps the most difficult part.
2 more questions. One from João Almeida. Where does scalability enter the equation of performance? Is it just another dimension of your performance budget, or should it be more the responsibility of whoever owns the infrastructure?
Complex question. I mean, scalability is part of it as long as we are talking about some level of service. Well, here, what we are talking about is connecting everything in order to deliver something meaningful to the client. And with that mindset, we need to be able to collect everything and do whatever we can on all sorts of tech concerns like scalability in order to be able to provide that level of service and that we are able to hold it. So we have to make scalability work for us, basically, in order for us to continue to amaze our customers, because that's the part. I typically say that all the computation that we have inside of our infrastructure is an investment. It's a cost, all with the purpose of trying to make that experience connect and have a value out of it. Until then, we are just wasting money.
And one last question that I think it could be a good question for you to wrap up a little bit, from Tatiana Almeida. Can you share your biggest challenges implementing this culture in a new company?
Biggest challenge, it's the setbacks. It's those days where you feel that you have accomplished something, but then you want to improve and then you regress, and it kind of feels like you are in circles. But then after you are long enough on this, you realize that's part of it, and that you embrace it, you accept it, but that does not derail you in any way, because you believe in a vision, you believe that will be a benefit for the company, and you keep pushing. I think that it's more on staying on the path. That's the main challenge, because and that you can captivate other people in order for you to scale this importance on teams. This happens every day, and that you are able to detect small signals that the culture is moving forward and is maturing. So it's also important that you have good people with you in order for you, because you need it. This cannot be done alone. You need other people in helping pushing this culture forward. But I would say that the main challenge is not technical. It's easy to improve performance if you put your mind to it. It's easy. The hardest part is really on the human side and connecting this culture. That's the main challenge here.
Yeah, changing the mindset. Thank you so much, Manuel. Do you have any final words?
No, thank you. Thank you for this time, and I hope I was able to at least provide you some good insights on how we can approach this at your company, especially if you are working on a big company. Understand the challenge, but do believe on the main benefit that you will be able to provide.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Manuel, and thank you so much for the attendees. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. A lot of people are asking me if you are share this presentation. Yes, we'll share it in our YouTube channel, FARFETCH People. So thank you, guys. I think we can back next month with another FARFETCH Tech Talk. Thank you, Manuel, again, and I hope to see you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.